What happens when someone tells you they still hear their dead spouse's voice every night, and you're live on national television with 300 people watching? Steve Harvey's microphone dropped. His signature smile vanished. The entire studio, contestants, crew, audience, froze in absolute silence. What this widow said next would change Steve Harvey's life forever. It was supposed to be a normal Tuesday taping of Family Feud. Two families competing, rapid-fire questions, Steve cracking jokes, the audience laughing. Standard procedure. The production team had lined up 5 episodes to tape that day, moving through them like clockwork. The Wilson family had just won their 3rd consecutive game. They were celebrating, high-fiving, doing that awkward family dance people do on game shows. Steve was in his element, making jokes, playing to the camera, keeping the energy high. Then came the introduction for the next family. The Hendersons. 5 members lined up at their podium, wearing matching blue shirts like families always do. Steve walked over with his trademark strut, microphone in hand, ready to do what he'd done thousands of times. Quick introductions, a few jokes, then straight into the game. "All right, Henderson family, welcome to Family Feud." Steve's voice boomed through the studio. "Let's meet the family. Starting with you, ma'am, what's your name?" But Steve Harvey didn't know he was about to meet someone who would shatter his professional composure completely. "My name is Margaret Henderson," the woman said. She was in her early 60s, gray hair pulled back neatly, wearing a simple blue cardigan over her team shirt. Her smile was warm but carried something else, a weight that Steve, with all his years reading people, immediately sensed. "Margaret! Beautiful name. And who do we have with you today?" "This is my daughter Jennifer, my son Michael, my daughter-in-law Susan, and my grandson Tyler." Standard introduction. Nothing unusual. Steve moved down the line, shaking hands, making small talk. But when he came back to Margaret, something made him pause. Maybe it was the way she held herself. Maybe it was the look in her eyes. Maybe it was just instinct. "So Margaret, tell me about your family. Y'all seem close." Margaret's smile faltered for just a second. That's when Steve knew something was different. "We are close," Margaret said, her voice steady but soft. "We had to become even closer after my husband Robert passed away 2 years ago." The studio didn't go silent yet. Death was mentioned on game shows sometimes. Steve had handled it before. Express condolences, maybe a quick story, then move on. Keep it light. Keep it moving. "I'm so sorry for your loss, Margaret," Steve said with genuine warmth. "How long were you and Robert married?" 43 years. The number hung in the air. 43 years. Steve nodded slowly, his comedian's instinct telling him to be careful here. "That's a beautiful life together. I know he's looking down proud of you being here today." Margaret nodded, but then she did something unexpected. She didn't let the moment pass. She didn't follow the script of game show small talk. "Mr. Harvey," she said, her voice suddenly stronger. "Can I tell you something?" Steve Harvey has perfect timing. He knows when to joke, when to pause, when to move on. But something in Margaret's voice made every instinct tell him, "Stop. Listen." "Of course," Steve said, and he meant it. Margaret took a breath. The studio was still operating normally, cameras rolling, audience settled, producers in the booth watching their schedule. Nobody knew what was coming. "I still hear his voice every night." The microphone in Steve's hand actually dipped toward the floor. His mouth opened slightly. The studio went from normal to frozen in exactly 1.3 seconds. Steve started, then stopped. For maybe the first time in his career on Family Feud, he had no response ready. Margaret continued, and now her voice was trembling. "Every night before I go to sleep, I hear him say goodnight, Maggie. I love you. It's been 2 years, and I still hear it as clear as if he's lying next to me." The audience had gone completely silent. You could hear the studio lights humming. A camera operator in the back was wiping his eyes. Steve Harvey, comedian, actor, host of countless shows, man who's supposed to keep things light and moving, stood absolutely still. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Everyone in that studio knew they weren't watching a game show anymore. Steve's eyes were glistening. He looked down, composed himself, then looked back at Margaret. Margaret! His voice was barely above a whisper, but the microphone caught every word. That's not your imagination. That's not grief playing tricks on you. Margaret looked up at him, tears now streaming down her face. That's love, Steve said. That's 43 years of a man telling his wife goodnight, so deep in your soul that it became part of you. That voice ain't never leaving you, because that love ain't never leaving you. But what Steve did next wasn't in any producer's playbook. He handed his card to a production assistant, walked off the mark where hosts are supposed to stand, stepped around the podium, and wrapped Margaret Henderson in a hug that lasted a full 15 seconds. The audience erupted. Not in applause, in something deeper. A collective emotional release. People were crying openly. The other family at their podium was crying. Margaret's family was holding each other. The tough-looking security guard by the exit was turned away, shoulders shaking. When Steve finally pulled back, he kept his hands on Margaret's shoulders. I want you to understand something, he said, and he wasn't talking to just Margaret anymore. He was talking to the whole studio, to everyone watching at home, to anyone who'd ever lost someone. When you love someone that deeply, they don't leave. They can't leave. That voice you hear? That's real. That's him keeping his promise to always say goodnight. Subscribe and leave a comment. Because the most powerful part of this story is still ahead. Margaret was nodding, crying, but also smiling now, really smiling for the first time since she'd walked onto that stage. Can I tell you what he used to say? Margaret asked. Please, Steve said. He'd say goodnight, Maggie. I love you. See you in the morning. Every single night. 43 years. And even now, I still hear see you in the morning. And you know what? I believe him. I believe I will see him in the morning someday. The camera operator literally had to step away from his camera because he couldn't see through his tears. Steve took a moment, looking at the floor, gathering himself. When he looked back up, his eyes were red but his voice was strong. Margaret, I want to tell you something, and I want your family to hear this too. He gestured to Jennifer, Michael, Susan, and Tyler, who were all crying at their podium. Robert Henderson was a blessed man. Not because of his success or his accomplishments, but because he got to love you for 43 years. And he did it so well that even death couldn't end it. Tyler, the grandson who couldn't have been more than 13, suddenly spoke up from his spot. Grandpa used to say Grandma was his favorite hello and his hardest goodbye. That's when Steve Harvey completely broke. The man who keeps millions of people laughing, who handles any situation with humor and grace, who's known for his composure. Tears streaming down his face, hand over his heart, unable to speak for a solid 10 seconds. The production assistant in the booth whispered to the producer, "Should we cut?" The producer, also crying, shook his head. "Keep rolling. This is real." When Steve finally found his voice again, he looked at Tyler. "Young man, what's your name?" "Tyler, sir." "Tyler, I want you to remember this. Your grandfather? He was the kind of man we all should aspire to be. The kind who loves so completely that his love echoes beyond his life. You carry his name, you carry his blood, but most importantly, you carry his example." Behind the scenes, Steve made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He turned to the production team and made a cutting motion. "Stop the cameras." The red lights on the cameras went off. "I need everyone to understand something," Steve said, now speaking without the TV performance. "Just Steve. Just human. I've done this show for years. I've met thousands of families. But every once in a while, you meet someone who reminds you what actually matters." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded handkerchief, a nice one, monogrammed. "Margaret," Steve said, This was a gift from my wife. She gives me one every Christmas. I want you to have it. Oh, Mr. Harvey, I couldn't. Please. Steve pressed it into her hands. When you hear Robert's voice tonight saying goodnight, I want you to hold this and know that people you've never met, all across this country, are holding you in their hearts too. Margaret clutched the handkerchief to her chest, sobbing now but in a way that felt like release, like healing. But this is the moment no one in the studio, and no one watching at home, ever saw coming. Jennifer, Margaret's daughter, stepped forward from the family podium. Mr. Harvey, she said, her voice shaking. Can I tell you something about my mom? Steve nodded. After Dad died, Mom stopped sleeping in their bedroom. She'd sleep on the couch because the bed felt too empty. But about 6 months ago, she moved back to the bedroom. And you know why? Steve shook his head, listening intently. Because she said she realized that's where Dad's voice was strongest. She said if she slept anywhere else, she might not hear him say goodnight. So she went back, even though it hurt, because hearing his voice was worth the pain. The entire studio, crew members who'd worked hundreds of episodes, jaded production staff who'd seen everything, were openly weeping. Steve walked over to Jennifer and pulled her into a hug too. Then Michael. Then Susan. Then he knelt down to Tyler's level. You're going to be a man soon, Steve said to the teenager. And when you are, I want you to love someone the way your grandfather loved your grandmother. Not just with words, but with consistency. Every single day. Every single night. Until your voice becomes part of their soul. Tyler nodded, tears streaming down his young face. Steve stood back up and looked at the whole Henderson family. You all know what you have here, right? You have a roadmap. You have seen what real love looks like. Margaret and Robert showed all of you, and now you've shown all of us, that love doesn't end. It echoes. It reverberates. It keeps going. The families on both sides of the stage, competitors minutes ago, joined together in the middle of the set in a massive group hug. Steve stepped back, watching them, hand over his mouth, just taking in this moment that had transformed from a game show into something sacred. After several minutes, Steve signaled to start the cameras again. We're going to play this game, he said to both families, voice still thick with emotion. But I want everyone watching to know something. The points don't matter today. The money doesn't matter today. What matters is that we witnessed something real. We witnessed the kind of love that outlives death. And that's worth more than any prize we could give away. The game did continue. The Hendersons won, but barely anyone remembers the score. What they remember is Steve stopping between questions to check on Margaret. They remember him telling jokes that made her laugh through her tears. They remember the way both families played with a gentleness, a respect for what had happened. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. When the taping wrapped, Steve did something he'd never done before. He took the entire Henderson family backstage to his private dressing room. They spent 45 minutes there. No cameras. No production staff. Just conversation. Later, Jennifer would tell reporters. He wanted to know everything about Dad. What he did for work, what made him laugh, how he and Mom met. He said he wanted to know the man whose love was strong enough to echo across death. Before they left, Steve gave Tyler his personal email address. I want updates, Steve told the teenager. I want to know how you're doing. I want to know what you're learning about love from watching your grandma. Promise me. Tyler promised. In the weeks after the episode aired, something extraordinary happened. The clip went viral with millions of shares. People sent it to widows, widowers, anyone who'd lost someone. The comments became a memorial wall, with thousands sharing their own stories of hearing loved ones' voices. Steve received over 50,000 letters thanking him for creating space for grief on television. He read every single one. Steve himself was changed. Margaret Henderson taught me that the moments when we're most vulnerable are the moments when we're most powerful, he'd say in interviews. He started a foundation called Voices That Echo, to support widows and widowers. Margaret became an ambassador, speaking at events, always bringing Steve's handkerchief. "I still hear Robert's voice every single night," she'd tell audiences. "And now I hear other voices too, saying we understand. The echo is getting louder, not quieter." The handkerchief that Steve gave Margaret that day now sits framed in her bedroom. Next to it is a photo of her and Robert on their wedding day. Below, a plaque Tyler made reads, "Good night, Maggie. I love you. See you in the morning." Every night, Margaret looks at that frame. And every night, she hears the voice. Steve Harvey helped millions understand that voice is real. Not through comedy. Through one simple act. Stopping the show and acknowledging that some moments are bigger than television. That's the power of authentic humanity. That's the legacy of the day Steve Harvey met Margaret Henderson. And that's the story of the voice that never stopped saying goodnight.